Next, I want to talk about human modification of the biosphere. So human modification of the biosphere in general can include things like the physical removal of organisms, like hunting, overhunting, habitat modification by changing the land use type, for example, and also the introduction of exotic species. And I want to use the San Joaquin Valley as an example where human modification of the environment is probably, the San Joaquin Valley is probably one of the most extreme examples of species becoming endangered because of human modification of the environment. So this is the San Joaquin Valley, essentially the southern part of the Central Valley. And if we look at how much rainfall it gets, as we mentioned, it's especially in the west and the south part of the San Joaquin Valley, it is extremely dry. In fact, some authors have labeled this part of the valley the San Joaquin Desert. So the San Joaquin Desert would be essentially from Bakersfield up through the west side, up near, say, Mendota, California, or at least along Interstate 5. Now, let me kind of go back one. Now, so we have a desert here in the San Joaquin Valley, and we have a desert over here in the Mojave Desert. And there are a number of species that are related to Mojave Desert, species that are unique to the San Joaquin Desert or the San Joaquin Valley in the south. These are desert species, essentially, like the San Joaquin kit fox, San Joaquin antelope squirrel, San Joaquin kangaroo rats, like the Fresno kangaroo rat or Tipton kangaroo rat, blunt-nosed leopard lizard, and things like the giant kangaroo rat, which live in the foothills of the western San Joaquin Valley. Now, one thing about the San Joaquin Valley that is unique compared to the Mojave is the Mojave typically doesn't get runoff from the Sierra Nevada. We do. These rivers under natural conditions make riparian corridors and also historically have provided a lot of wetland conditions in the middle of the Central Valley. So what we end up having is a mix of desert and swampland and forests, which is something like this, that the San Joaquin Valley under natural conditions would be a blend of desert, steppe, mid-latitude grassland, also some forested areas, some areas that are like oak woodland near Tulare County and Kings County, then also large areas of water, like the Tulare Lake, which we're going to talk about next week, and wetlands in the Delta, and wetlands in places like Los Banos, Tranquility, and other places. These are a couple of other lakes. This is Lake Buena Vista and the Kern Lake, which are a couple of other historical lakes here in the valley. Now, beginning in the 1800s after the gold rush, there was a high demand for food in California, and the Central Valley, including the San Joaquin Valley, was seen as a place to do that. So if you look at the areas in green, these are some of where we had some of the early agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley, including around Fresno, Madera, Kings County, and around Bakersfield. Agriculture expanded going into the 1900s with the creation of small-scale irrigation projects. That is, people began to divert water from rivers. You had an expansion of and also drained wetlands here in the north. You had an expansion of agriculture throughout the San Joaquin Valley. However, you still had large areas of remnant grassland that remained. However, one big change came with the large water projects of the 1940s. So during the Great Depression, large water projects like the Friant Dam created and the creation of associated canals opened up irrigation to larger parts of the Central Valley. So now you had an expansion of irrigation into much more of the San Joaquin Valley, shown in green. And even more still with the State Water Project of the 1970s. And so here with the California aqueduct, that opened up the west side, the San Joaquin Desert area, to irrigation, and we don't have that much habitat left now. Most of this green area is in irrigation, and today you also have expansion of urban areas as well. So what you've gone is from as an environment that looked like this at the top to the same area like this at the bottom, where the open kind of dry environment where these species lived has now turned into irrigated fields. So going from this kind of historical desert and other lakes and marshes, we've kind of slowly transitioned over time to where a lot of that stuff has been gobbled up, and that's the primary cause of endangerment for those species that we looked at. They just don't have the places where they used to live. There's not as much of it anymore. And then also for what's left, it's also fragmented. It's in little pieces. In some places it's disconnected, and other places it's been degraded or over, it's been, even where you do still have natural environments, they're not always pristine.